Good morning, my brothers and sisters, and welcome to this special celebration at Assumption Church with the cooperation of the Archdiocese of Chicago to the season of creation. Our pastor, Father Joseph Shamblin, has very well outlined the development of this special commemoration each year between the 1st of September and the 4th of October, which is the feast of St. Francis, sort of the patron saint of the ecological movement. The history briefly for those who don't know it and haven't had an opportunity as yet to read Father Joe's outline on the in the parish bulletin began in 215 when the ecumenical patriarch of the Greek Orthodox Church decided to have this celebration of the season of creation, given the real challenge that all of us are facing on a global level by climate change. Subsequently, his effort was endorsed by the World Council of Churches, and then eventually 3 recent popes have taken up the theme as well, beginning with Pope John Paul II, Pope Benedict, and of course now Pope Francis. In 215, Pope Francis wrote an encyclical called Laudato Si', an encyclical on climate change and the challenges that are facing the entire global community, but the religious community especially. He wrote that as a way of trying to bring Catholic consciousness into the awareness of the severity of the present climate challenge. That encyclical has received considerable positive affirmation, not only within the Church, but especially by the scientific community and by people such as the Secretary General of the United Nations. As a result of the encyclical, we have a new mandate given us by Pope Francis to undertake what Father Joe mentioned in his opening remark, a reconciliation between the human community and the natural world. In a recent address a few days ago, Pope Francis again reiterated his notion that when we look at the history of the industrial age, we see, in fact, a kind of war going on between the human family and the world of nature. A war that has left many destructive effects on the world of nature that now are beginning to affect our very lifestyle on the globe. And so we now have a new challenge before us. For me, this challenge is not so new. I was introduced to it originally back in 1970 when attending an international conference in Los Angeles. The keynote address was given by a social philosopher named Hans Jonas. And at one point, he turned to the audience of some 2,000 people and in a strong voice said to all of us, "You are the first generation to have to face the question whether there will be future generations. Are we engaged in a kind of human activity that is so destructive that it will make creational life, whether human or other, animal, vegetable, and so on, whether it will make it impossible for any form of life to continue to exist on this planet?" And so the challenge is immense. The clock is ticking, and it's frankly near midnight. The scientific reports coming from the United Nations in recent years, including one that was released just last week, indicate that we only have a very short time to take the steps as a global community that are required to bring climate destruction under control. We are not without hope. There are some new technologies. We have made some progress in at least keeping the carbon dioxide infection of our atmosphere from rising. But we still have a major, major issue to face there. And that's not about to happen without our collaboration. So when we ask ourselves, what is our motivation, not just as a human community, but as a Catholic Christian community, to engage in the necessary effort to combat climate change? I would at least offer three ideas, three reflections from the Christian tradition that would help us undertake the type of commitment that Pope Francis is calling us to make. The first would be to look again at the story of creation in Genesis, where Genesis describes God's creative act in bringing what we call our world into being. The book of Genesis refers to that action, divine action, as good. It emphasizes the beauty of that creation. Unfortunately, on occasion, we in the Catholic community and the wider Christian community have overemphasized the sinful dimensions of the story of creation. Yeah, Adam and Eve failed us, but not permanently. The goodness, the beauty of creation that God originally instilled in it remain for us to enjoy and to protect. And so the story of creation, viewed from its positive aspects, is one foundation for a Catholic commitment to ecological improvement. The second one would be the readings of St. Paul. St. Paul often speaks of creation in his epistles, and he speaks of the groaning of all creation for redemption. And what he does in saying that is, I think, posit and a deep-seated connection between the human community and the rest of creation that we have regrettably often lost over the centuries, and which needs very much to be restored today. For that reason, Pope Francis has strongly emphasized the significance of biodiversity. Now, biodiversity can be a technical term which many of us may not fully understand. Another way of expressing what it tries to present us with is the term that we live in a web of creation, that we are interlinked. All nature is interlinked, and we will not survive if the rest of nature doesn't survive. For that reason, Pope Francis issued a strong statement in December of last year to the Biodiversity Conference of the United Nations meeting in Montreal. And that conference, to which I was an accredited delegate, issued a final statement called the 3030 Statement, in which nations of the world committed themselves to, by 2030, to protect 30% of their land area for the survival of a habitat that can sustain life for all levels of creation. And so that is one of the first tasks I think that we have to do, is to recognize how deeply intertwined we are with all of nature. That must become part of our spirituality for the present time. We must also recognize what Pope Francis has also strongly stressed in so many of his statements on this issue, and that is that the world in which we live is our common home, but it is our home. Often in the past, we have looked upon in our prayer tradition and in our theology at the human world, at the global world, as a period of exile. The problem is, if we regarded it as exile, then all we might be tempted to do is want to escape from it. Because by definition, no one wants to live in a situation of exile. For however God chooses to sustain the world he created, that we must recognize it as the home for all people and all of creation. And that is another part of the spirituality that is called upon in our time. But we cannot just stop at prayer and spirituality in terms of our approach to solving the climate crisis. Prayer, the formation of a new ecological spirituality, which Pope Francis has made so central, is insufficient if it is not coupled with direct action to protect our environment. We cannot truncate our prayer, our spirituality from such direct action. Now, there are many things we can do. In the parish bulletins here at Assumption Church for well over a year now, there have been suggestions as to how one might incorporate a more creation-oriented spirituality into our everyday activities. All those suggestions are important, and we still need to follow up on them. But in many ways, they are also insufficient. For some years, for me, since 1970, we have spoken of the climate crisis as a future event. My friends, it is no longer future. It is very much in our midst. And I don't have to recite to you the long list of incidents over the past several months that will illustrate that it is real and upon us. And it will get worse if we do not take action. We need to take action not only individually, but we need to mobilize. Pope Francis, in his statement of a week or so ago, spoke of the situation almost in military terms, that we need to mobilize as a human community in the same way we would mobilize if we were facing a severe military threat. And that mobilization must include efforts to convince our political leaders to take action on the two central issues that confront us in a special way in the climate crisis. The first and the absolutely central one is the need to cut our dependence as quickly as possible on fossil fuels. Fossil fuels and their use is the most destructive practice that the global community still uses to pollute the atmosphere throughout the world. And we must put a stop to it as soon as possible. And that will not be an easy thing to get done. But if we don't get it done, a lot of the other actions will really have little or no consequence. The second one is the pollution of our oceans, especially by plastics. Plastics are among the most destructive ways of packaging, and they're flooding, in a sense, they're flooding of the ocean waters is causing major destruction to the water systems of the world, which are so important to sustain life for all of us. What creature can continue to live without water? And if our water supplies become increasingly destructive, not only are they depriving us of the energy and the vitality that all of us need, they also deprive us of the food of the ocean and also bring about the destruction of the very necessary coral reefs. So the challenge before us, my brothers and sisters, is indeed great. Hopefully, the laborers in the vineyard will be many, not few. And equally, hopefully, may we be part of that corps of laborers. We need to make that commitment as we celebrate this season of creation. Make it personally, make it collectively as a global community. If we do that, I think we still have a chance to rescue our global society, our human planet, from the ravages that we have caused it to undergo. Therefore, I ask your blessing, I ask God's blessing upon our activity. I ask our blessing upon our Mother Earth, who has given us life and continues to sustain life at all levels. God bless you.